everybody, welcome to another episode of Football versus Homophobia podcast.
This episode is part of Football vs Homophobia's Football Pride event, which is a one-day event taking place across all sorts of platforms. There's loads of interviews, discussions, panels, there's a few quizzes, family-friendly events. So hopefully anyone watching on YouTube at the moment, you'll also have kind of seen some of our other events that are going on. It's all very exciting. There's lots of great stuff happening throughout the day. But we're joined by a really exciting guest today on the podcast. This person has played for Arsenal and Chelsea. She's been out to the US and played out in Sweden as well, and has just been signed by Aston Villa. So all sorts of kind of great experiences there that we're going to talk about today. She's also played in the 2011 World Cup and the 2012 Olympics as well. So hi, Anita. Great.
Hi, guys. Thank you for having me.
Do you want to introduce yourself a little bit? Just kind of share some things that, you know, you'd love people to know about you, kind of a little bit about who you are?
Yeah, well, you know, I'm probably considered a veteran in the game now. And, you know, I've had great experiences in the women's game from the early days, from when it was amateur, really, to the professional game now. And I think aside from that, football, I've managed to merge two passions of mine, football and sort of socio-political activism as well. So one of the things I like to do is involve myself in projects and other causes where I can lend sort of my platform to other voices as well. And I've been able to do that through Amnesty International and Show Racism the Red Card, and now working with FIFA Pro, which is all about players having a voice as well within the game. So yeah, that's like one of my other passions, along with coffee, drinking lots and lots of coffee and cafe culture in general, which I got into from my experiences playing in Sweden and Swedish culture and fika and all that. So yeah, you know, those are my two main passions. So like, if you want to hang out with me, just take me to a very good cafe, coffee, and we'll be like, you know, best mates for life.
We'll have to do our research up here in Glasgow and get
Yeah. And I think it's really fab that you're using your platform to make change and to talk about political things, because that's something that we talk about so much on this podcast. Every time we interview someone, it comes up. Professional footballers need to be using their platform, need to be speaking out. That's the only way we're going to see change. So it's really good to see all the work you've been doing, definitely.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I think over the years, you know, when I was a younger player, I probably would have described myself as more introverted and not really, you know, bold in that way to express certain things. And I think as I've gotten older and I've got more confidence and also got more life experience, I felt in a position to do that more and do it more comfortably and be able to learn sort of how to express it in the way that I want. So yeah, I think it's important too, and I agree. And I think we're seeing that today, you know, with younger players starting to do that and the impact it has.
Definitely. Do you think there's also a link there between the status and the increased profile that the women's game has got in recent years?
Most definitely, because I think ultimately it always comes down to visibility, you know, and once the game has gotten more professional and there's more access to it on, you know, broadcast, radio, print media, whatever it is, suddenly players' profiles grow with that too, and the audience follow them and they grow with them. And there's more people that you actually can capture in those platforms. So I think that definitely has played a part in it. And I think actual players recognizing the power as well of their own platforms and, you know, the people that have access to them and using it in the right way, as you're seeing with, you know, the likes of Rashford and Sterling's also done it, Eniola with her case and things like that. So all of that has an opportunity to have some positive impact and change.
And as you say kind of before, the more people who come out, use their platform to can use their voice, actually it makes it easier for the younger players, doesn't it? And you know, more people are then recognising the platform and actually their responsibility in some ways to come and have those conversations and be more visible about a range of issues.
Definitely. And I think, you know, like I used the example of Rashford recently, and, you know, he's a young player taking on a big cause, but obviously it's something he himself has experienced and gone through. But he's a role model too. And I think younger players will look to him and go, you know what, he's not just a footballer. He's more than this. He's a guy with a real humble quality about him, who understands the benefits of his own experience and what he wouldn't have maybe been able to achieve without that kind of support, and how necessary it is for the next generation. And I think that's important for people to see. And you know, we've moved away from that time where people used to say, you're athletes, just do your thing, stay in your lane, and not talk about politics or society or whatever it is. You know, we're past that, and I think it's good that sort of the modern era and the next generations are really taking on this activism as well.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
Yeah, if we left politics just to politicians, then we'd be in a bit of a terrible situation, wouldn't we? So absolutely, I think it's so powerful for other people to be speaking out, especially people who have like lived experience. I mean, one of the biggest problems, I mean, in the UK, I'm talking about, is that people that are in positions of power in terms of politics and things that are going on in the world are people that don't have lived experience and don't actually know like what they're talking about. So to have athletes who are from communities talking about the issues faced by that community is really powerful.
Yeah, and I think football is that kind of a game that, you know, we always talk about how it unites and brings people together, has a chance to sort of bring together integration. But football serves communities. Most football clubs are the beacon of the communities, and they do lots of other things aside from providing football, you know, in terms of foundation support, you know, mental health support, whatever it is. Football is grown in that in the industry itself to provide another service. So actually, in one sense, athletes and people within the game have a greater sense of the needs of their direct communities in a way that you're saying that politicians are removed from often. So yeah, I think that's a really positive thing for our game, especially the women's game, which has been noted, I guess, for taking or supporting lots of issues, you know, LGBT plus issues and mental health issues, women's issues. You know, we're typically known for that, and we're at a time where we want to see that shift as well happen in the men's game, and then talk about it more openly and confront them.
Definitely. So Anita, we've talked a little bit about kind of younger generation. Where did it all start for you? You know, what sparked that interest in football? How did you, where did it all start, and how did you go on that journey to become a professional footballer?
Well, I think for me, it's like when you're young, you live in your own bubble. Do you know what I mean? When you're young, all you care about is your mates playing after school with all your friends, and life is great. It's that feeling. And I started playing football when I was about like 6, 7, in and around my house, you know, with family members and friends. And then my passion for the game just kept growing. You know, I lived on an estate, so I met lots of kids all the time in my area. So you were never short of a football opportunity to play. And we'd go out in the backyard and everyone just like play Wembley and all these games, you know, growing up. And I just, do you know what I mean? And so I'd always play with all the guys in my area. And for me, when I talk about that bubble, football's the thing that connected all of us. No matter our like gender differences, religion, race, whatever. I got to meet so many different kids, but we were all the same, just because of our direct, immediate surroundings and our interest in football. So that kind of continued. You know, I go to school. I think about it now, and I'm like, in primary school, I would play in the playground during the breaks in, you know, the worst skirts in uniform. But for me, it like never crossed my mind that like this isn't something I should be doing, or, you know, that people would perceive it as like, why is she playing football, why is she whatever. I just did it because I enjoyed it, and as long as the kids around me accepted it, it was never really an issue. You know, the issues that I encountered later on were just that some guys get annoyed that there's a girl that's good enough to hang and compete and play, and then they want to like chop my legs off and stuff. And I remember going to a boys team in my local area, and one of the kids I knew from my school, and his dad was like one of the coaches, and he was so annoyed at how good I was. He spent the whole session just trying to take me out, literally just trying to write me out, to the point that his dad had to like drag him, you know, and be like, have a seat. But for me, I think it like spurred me on more, because it was the recognition that, oh, okay, I'm actually good enough, or, you know, people see me as good enough to play and hang and compete. I want to keep going. And that's how I really started. But I didn't get into club football until I was about 14, and that was at Arsenal. And really, when we talk about role models and people that support and push you, I was really lucky. I had a head of PE that pushed me and said, look, there's a tryout in your area, Arsenal are in town, you definitely need to go. Like, I'm pushing you, you better do it, sort of thing. So I went with some friends from school. I was like, yeah, whatever, this is no big deal. Didn't know anything about women's football. Didn't really know there was a league, a structure, anything. And it happened to be Rachel Yankee taking a session and Claire Wheatley, who both were Arsenal players. And from that moment onwards, they were like, we want you to come back, come to the Centre of Excellence, train with our youth team. Did that. Then after that session, I signed with the club. And really that is the point that my football career or journey began, I would say, and took off.
That's amazing.
That's so cool.
Yeah, that's really cool.
And also I laugh because I was definitely also that young girl who played in like terrible long skirts and I was playing football on the playground. So I definitely have memories of that.
I think that thing about like having a role model is so important, because while you can be motivated by people's like kind of negative attitudes, like the boys, you know, being annoyed that you're better and stuff, that motivation can only get you so far, and to have those people that kind of push you into it and support you to do it is just so important, isn't it?
Definitely.
100%. And I think for me it was like, okay, someone believes in my talent or believes in me, and that, you know, that person also tried to build within me self-confidence and self-esteem, you know. And I think that's important for young people in general when you're younger, because that is actually what you need, along with resilience, to get to where you're going. Do you know what I mean? And so I think that was really crucial for me. But, you know, for you guys, like, how did your passion for football begin, do you think?
So I think I'm probably the bigger football fan. Yeah, I was always playing football in the playground and, you know, kind of just hanging out. I just loved running around, really. And my dad would always take me and my sister to our local non-league club and stuff, and so we'd always be playing, and that was mum's quality time. She loved it when we were out of the house. At one point said, you know, look, if you're talking about football all the time, you're going to have to start playing, you know, and kind of join a team and be involved that way. So, you know, I love playing in a team. I was never the best footballer, but, you know, it's just, for me, football has always been more than kind of just the playing aspect of it. You know, it's been the social side of it. It's been the mental health elements. It's been kind of developing that community and you know, finding friends and people within your team, which I've always really enjoyed. Right. And then actually, kind of something that links in with something I'd love to ask you. For me, I realised that there's kind of a whole different world in football is kind of a career other than just playing. You know, you've got the coaching side of it as well, but actually there's all the backroom staff and kind of the administration side of things. And so for me, I spotted that what you were saying, really, football has that power to engage communities who perhaps are either underrepresented or, you know, aren't currently engaged with, and, you know, you can use football to reach out to them and start to build that connection, build that relationship. And actually, you know, it might not just be the football that you're, you know, supporting that community with. Actually, then there are other conversations you can have, other support that you can offer. And so actually that's the big draw in football for me, you know, those wider benefits that impact society. I don't know if you want.
Yeah, I mean, I can't really follow Beatrice in a good way because my story isn't as nice. Well, I played football as a kid. My mum coached the girls team, and yeah, I played as a kid. But honestly, like, I'm dyspraxic and have always been like really tall and quite fat, to be honest. And, you know, I've just never been like a very sporty person. I did love football as a kid, but yeah, just kind of stopped playing any sport for such a long time and as a teenager. And then I do this now because you know, I believe that queer people should be included in every aspect of society, and somehow I've kind of fallen into sport, and so now I'm passionate about, you know, queer inclusion in sport. And so that's kind of why I do what I do. So work for FEH, also work for Leap Sports Scotland and Pride Sports, and do bits everywhere. But yeah, generally I see myself as more of an activist than a sporty person.
I think it's really nice that there are people in so many different areas of the game who are activists and who are kind of working to make a change. Actually, there's you as a player, and you know, you see your platform as a real way to kind of make change, kind of use your voice, talk about your experiences, but also broader experiences, you know. And I think my message when I talk to people about football is it's not always just about playing. There are so many other ways to make a difference and to use football to to make a change for the better, really.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's like you were saying earlier about there's so many other roles within the game. I think unless you're in that bubble of the football world, do you really realize it always? And like you're saying about, you need to like breaking those barriers so that people recognize that actually might be another area of the game that you might enjoy or be very good at, you know, whether it be officiating, physios, I don't know, massage therapy, whatever it is. There's actually so many jobs in football. And that's what I always try to tell people and encourage people, is to see that, you know, there's a whole world for you aside from playing, if that's not your thing, in the game that still has the element of community and you know, integration in that way that we try to, as best as we can, promote. But yeah, definitely.
And Anita, I'm curious, did you ever see yourself becoming a footballer, or kind of even a professional footballer? Did that kind of change for you when you signed for Arsenal, or did you never really see that as kind of what you'd be doing in the future?
Yeah, I mean, when I was young, I always thought I'd be either a physio or a journalist. Those are the things, you know, when you're at school and they go, careers, what do you want to do? And I was like, oh, I think maybe one of these two. But never a professional footballer, because it just wasn't, it wasn't in my psyche. It didn't exist really in our world, at least in the UK. So that wasn't sort of my ambition at the time, because I just didn't think there was a career path towards it as such. So I always was like studying, you know, at school and whatever, and went to university thinking that I was eventually just going to go off in another trajectory. And it just so happened that after playing in the UK, you know, for Arsenal all those years, and a small stint at Chelsea, when the US League came around and it was fully professional and I got drafted, I was like, okay, this might be a once in a lifetime opportunity to experience. So I was like, you know, I should definitely just do this and see. You know, I didn't know what it meant to be a professional, or what the demands, or, you know, would be, or anything, but it was just exciting, and I just felt like it was an opportunity to start something that hopefully would continue for the future. And that's really what happened. And then from that point on, as time has gone on, the game has continued to sort of evolve all over the world in different spots, you know, from semi-pro to professional. And I think it's on this steady trajectory to trying to get, you know, closer in that area, within clubs and within different nations as well.
Definitely. And what was your experience like out in the States, and then kind of compared to Sweden as well? I actually can't imagine what football in women's football in Sweden would have been like. How was that?
Well, in America, you know, you have that whole entertainment element of America in general, and the way sports is presented and stuff. So it was very much that feeling like, you know, they wanted to do it in a very packaged way to promote the game that's entertaining as well. And in terms of the playing and everything, it was exciting because there were, you know, league rules, like you had to have 5 internationals per team or whatever, and then, you know, domestic US players, national team players. So you had a good blend of different players and youth as well, college players getting drafted into the league. Which, so it's like a bed of all these different components coming together. And I I actually felt like I learned and experienced so much in a short period of time, because, you know, my first housemate was a Brazilian player. You know, in that experience, I learned so much about Brazil, the culture, the food, the language. And I thought it was great, you know, to also compete and train with some of the best players in the world as well, to develop myself. So yeah, that whole experience and the culture of Americans, you know, the winning mentality, the work ethic, the leadership. You know, I played a Heather O'Reilly at the time. I had Christy Rampone, who was our captain. You know, to have those people around me that could influence me as a person as well in a good way on and off the pitch, is something you can't imagine, like you can't ask for. I never expected to play with world champions, you know, in my career, but that happened, and it was an amazing experience. So I think it's a lot more, you know, bold, very driven culture, you know, because they want to succeed, they believe in themselves, they push everyone, they pull everyone along with them, was my experience. And in Sweden, it's different. I think Sweden, what I liked about Sweden was the less hierarchical way to structure a team or team sport, and that, you know, everyone kind of has a voice and everyone should share their opinion and that type of thing, you know, with the coaches too. And, you know, everyone is equal in a sense of respect, and, you know, as adults, whether you're 18 or 30 plus, like, there's this feeling of like, well, you all are important, you all have a voice, you all should have a part to play. And I enjoyed that element of it, that freedom of expression. And I would also say, you know, that's kind of where my social activism started to come through more, because I was surrounded. I lived in Malmo for 4 years. Wow. When I was at Rosengård, and Malmo is really like a very diverse part of Sweden, but it's also got this like artistic, you know, hipster, whatever, and it's sort of underground social political activism going on. And you bump into people like in a cafe or on the street, and you get in conversations, and they're like, come to this, or there's this conference or this thing. And for me, that's when I got to sort of experience that element of it, aside from playing in Sweden, which I really enjoyed, that cultural aspect. And my club was heavily involved in projects to do with refugees in football as well, and also projects in South Africa to build the self-esteem of girls. So that element of it combining was where I found that in Sweden, at least at my club, there was this more holistic picture of what the game can do for women and girls, not only in the country, but, you know, abroad and in the direct community.
And that must have been a really nice contrast in a way from, yeah, as you say, the States, where it is all about perhaps the showcase of women's football, and perhaps, I don't know if that's fair to say, perhaps, you know, getting the viewer numbers, sponsorship side of things, and actually Sweden, a very different approach to how you can use football.
Yeah, well, because I think in Sweden, you know, the main aim for my club, at least my second club there, was that they just wanted to get as many girls into a position where they had access, first and foremost, to the game. And then secondly, that they felt that girls and women deserve to have professional teams or professional league, a professional setup where we have the facilities to train and the right support around us. They were like, that's the fundamental thing for them. That's the foundation. And then whatever happens from then on, you know, is building towards that sustainability through sponsors and things like that. And so if from their starting point in conception, for me, that was like, wow, this is great. Like, these are people that just recognize that really sport should be for everyone on an equal level. And also towards the elite game, making sure that there is some sort of, well, you know, aim to get some parity. So, you know, that for me was a great experience as well.
Yeah. Sounds really refreshing, doesn't it?
And I actually have been told by somebody, you might be able to say whether this is true or not, that in Sweden, like, the women's game is just as important as the men's game. Like everybody goes out and watches it, and it's not just women that watch it. Like it's like everybody sees it at the same level. But that was a Swedish person, so maybe they were being biased about their country.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that, at least in my experience when I played at Rosengård, we had really dedicated supporters, and they were a range of ages. You know, they prepped songs, like they, you know, committed with their labels and tags, and I thought that was great to see a dearth of different demographic of people. But I think in terms of audiences, you know, I think there's been a drop off probably, and there was during my time there, and that's largely to do with the economy, you know, the money in the game, and the support, and also promotion of the sport, and that always is to do with visibility. If you don't broadcast games, you don't put it out there, most people aren't even aware it's happening, and that's always been part of the problem for the women's game, is getting that access and getting that showcase out there for everyone. And I just think, as the game has continued to grow, you know, I think what they've always been great at is developing good talent, young players. They've had a, you know, historical strong league for decades, but the game as a whole has expanded, and the global sort of economy of football and the women's game has grown. So you're seeing more players leave their home nations and play abroad, play in different clubs, and get other opportunities, which can also be good and bad, obviously, when you look at from a development perspective and people wanting to develop their own talent at home. But then on a global perspective, sometimes it's how you drive standards somewhere else. Do you know what I mean? It's the same for any movement when we talk about equality, even in women's rights, for example. You know, if something's bubbling away in one nation, and because we're so globalized now with social media, and we see that, we're like, wait a minute, we don't have that. How do we push for that? How can we ride off the wave of this change? And football and most things are similar in that sense. You know, the standards keep improving here, then other nations go, oh wait, we can't allow this gap to keep growing, we got to find a way. So that can also be a good thing as well.
You can certainly drive change and progress quicker, can't it? Which can be really, really positive. We've been talking a lot to other people on our podcast, and you know, we've always tried to use this podcast as a platform to raise people's voices, especially kind of minorities within and kind of individuals who've got intersecting identities. And we've kind of focused a lot on kind of Black Lives Matter kind of current situation, especially within football, and people's experiences as kind of Black individuals within football. And you know, I think your experience will be really interesting, kind of from a professional footballer's perspective, also being a gay woman as well. You know, what has your experience been of being a gay woman, a Black woman in football?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really good question, and broad question. I think it always is an interesting one to discuss, because for me, when I got into the game in the earlier days at Arsenal, for example, you know, I had other Black players, mixed race players in my team, and you know, even as a youth player, I was playing with lots of players from other backgrounds as well and other identities. And so for me, I didn't experience some of the negativity that we're talking about these days in the game in terms of racism or discrimination and things like that. I think, you know, in the women's game, you can automatically say we're all discriminated against to one degree, because we've never really had the sort of equal footing in terms of support, investment, things from the beginning, and that's steadily happening, but it's still got a ways to go. And in terms of race and things like that, I just and sexuality, football was probably the first space that I got to meet people who happen to identify as gay or part of the LGBTQ, you know, community from a younger age. And so for me, I never really saw it as anything different or not the norm. You know, I just took those people as they were, as my friends, my colleagues, my teammates. And I think over time, it was the outside of that bubble is probably where I felt the most insecure. Do you know what I mean? In other spaces where you're at school or whatever, you're in different social environments where I didn't maybe always feel that I could be 100% myself, or maybe I filtered myself or whatever. And I just think as I got older, there's a certain level of confidence when it comes to sexuality, at least, and being ready yourself to be your authentic self, be who you are, that I had to find that journey and go along that journey, you know, in my own time. You know, even though I felt that, you know, there's lots of people around me who are quite open with their sexuality or their relationships, I wasn't in that place then to do that for myself, because I was still probably trying to understand who I was and who I am. And then I got to a time where I did feel comfortable enough to come out to my family and then beyond, you know. But like most people in the LGBT community can understand, you're always coming out to some degree, unless you're doing it in this like mass way where you either are publicly announcing that through a press or whatever, that I'm this or I'm that, which is also can be a frustrating thing, because you just want to be who you are and not really have to discuss it always in a way that's so pronounced that you just like, I'm letting you know and see into my life and get a feel for who I am by just being me. You know, if I post stuff or I talk about stuff related to my relationship, myself, that's me just being me. But having to declare it is like another thing itself. You know, it's like you don't have straight people always going, I'm straight, this is my marriage. Like, do you know what I mean? So there's that element of it too. But yeah, in terms of race, I think for me, what I've really understood over the years is I feel quite thankful for the most part. I've had good experiences, regardless of being a minority in football, with the people, teammates and coaches and whatever. But I think in terms of, I notice now even more so the structural barriers that affect lots of you know, marginalized groups that want to participate in the game and get into the game. And that's all to do with the way the game has expanded and how clubs also aren't situated in areas they used to be, where they run these kinds of programs, whether it be grassroots or, you know, beyond. They're in areas that actually exclude lots of people, or, you know, in my opinion. So that is structural, because that's something that can, you know, definitely be reformed. And I guess the one thing I've always experienced or noticed, I think the challenge is that I'm an older player now. I'm quite confident in myself in terms of if something was wrong, or, you know, another player struggling or whatever, that I would support them, or I would help them find the right support in that capacity. But I do worry for the few players that are in the game from other backgrounds who don't necessarily have that. Do you know what I mean? All over the country. Yeah. And by that, we always look to the field as being the diverse part of the game in terms of talent, and that's great, but it's nowhere else around us. It's not in the coaching stuff, it's not in the backroom stuff, it's not in the, you know, whatever the main structures and platforms within the football club structure or governance structure. And that's a worry, because then it makes me wonder, how do our needs and our views get represented in the areas where power is actually executed?
And how do people recognize that as well? You know, actually, if those decision makers are stereotypically old white men, you know, they're not going to recognize that there's an issue, that, you know, there aren't that representation of black coaches within the game, or black coaches or Asian male coaches. They aren't going to notice that there's an absence there and recognize that change needs to happen. That's
definitely. And I think, you know, language, you know, I think language is so underrated, like in the sense that people don't realize that, yeah, there's lots of us that are, you know, that have different cultures that we grew up with. And so, you know, your understanding of my culture might be different, but the way you talk to me or refer to, I don't know, something I eat or something you know, my hair or whatever, might actually be negative, might actually be racist, might actually be unconscious bias. And if you don't have that understanding or education, or even just other people around that people mingle with all the time, then you're going to encounter more and more of these problems to some degree. So yeah, that's my kind of concern, you know, for the younger generations coming through. And also, you know, the visibility aspect, when you don't see people that come, you know, look like you or from your area or whatever, making it into these positions where we look to celebrities and athletes as successful, then they might not see that as a position that they can reach or strive for, or even understand the pathway. They don't know how to get there, you know, or whatever. And that's hard, because if you don't have people in the system or the ecosystem to some degree that will just come and pluck someone that they recognize, okay, you're from exactly the same area. I know it's going to be a bit more challenging, but I'm going to help you get here, mentoring, supporting you, or giving you the information as how to get involved. It's even more challenging the more and more people get removed and distanced from the people that have these barriers. So yeah, that's really, I think, my thing, because you know, I'm still in the game, fortunately, now, and I just think there's fewer, in my opinion, at least in the women's game, coming through, and I think that's worrying, because I don't think it's reflective of the societies or communities we live in at all.
Sure, yeah. And it's interesting, isn't it? You know, I wonder if, I mean, there's a lot of ifs in this question, but, you know, if there was professional women's football when you were growing up and you saw someone that looked like you, actually, you might have recognised that's a career that I could have, because, you know, there's already someone who has a similar background to me who's already playing. And I have no doubt that there'll be lots of young girls who'll be looking at you, your career, and thinking, oh, great, you know, that's possible for me. But I think that's where the rest of football and the structures around football, and certainly the governance, it all needs to do that reflection, do that learning, recognise where the gaps are, where, you know, it's not quite going right at the moment, or where it's just stuck in its current ways.
Yeah, no, for sure.
And I'm just wondering, do you have, well, you obviously will, but, you know, what are your kind of current view? I was going to say, do you have any current views on the situation in football? But I'm going to rephrase that to, what are your views? Kind of, especially the discussion going on around racism and the structures and the progress that needs to happen in football.
Well, it's one of two things, actually. I think there are policies in place to try to counteract some of these situations that arise. So yeah, if a racist incident occurs at a stadium or football pitch or whatever, there's obviously rules and stuff, regulations in place to try to manage that. But in actual fact, I think the problem is that too often the rules aren't good enough to really counteract the issues, or the people deciding on the rules are not the ones that tend to be affected by these issues. So that's also an issue in itself, because you need people that can shed light and give perspective and shared experience on those things to actually inform how you regulate and sort of put policies in place to protect players and supporters that encounter racism or discriminations, sexism, all of those things. So that's like one of my views on that. But I think obviously the key thing is the same with gender discrimination. You know, if you don't have on your boards, in the boardroom, executive management, operations, women or people from Black and other backgrounds, and, you know, or who identify with different sexualities, whatever, in these spaces that can inform what young people coming into the game might experience and might need, then how really are we going to create the changes and embed it within the structures to benefit everybody in the long term?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. And it is literally like, we probably can cut this out because sometimes I just make statements that aren't, they're a bit tangenty, but it is literally the definition of discrimination and oppression. It's when people are have prejudices against a group of people, but the people that hold the prejudice are in position of power, and that's how oppression continues, and that's how the cycle continues. And until there's like equality in the positions of power, there's not going to be equality in the rest of the world, you know. And I just think,
yeah, I mean, exactly. That's a very that's the very good way I might steal that.
please do.
To explain that point. No, 100%, because I think at the end of the day, one of the biggest problems we have is just transparency with the most things, with a lot of things that affect us as individuals and society as a whole, is the lack of transparency. When we know what is going on, when we know how these structures are in place, why they're in place, how do people get hired, how do people get recruited, what are the pathways, can we really tackle the issues, the gaps, the closed networks, the whatever, and get to the sort of heart of these problems. Because it's not just about obviously placing people there, it's also understanding the barriers. Why don't they get there? They might be in the ecosystem, but for some reason they just fall to the wayside, or they don't fit the status quo, or the network, in terms of we go for golf every weekend, so this is why so and so gets hired, or whatever. Like, I really believe that's part of it as well.
Definitely.
Yeah, 100%.
And I think it follows on from that point. There have been some really interesting conversations recently in light of the Black Matter protests and the current discussions going on around racism. And I'm sure you probably would have caught it. I think there was something on Sky Sports where there was a bit of a discussion around women's football that was going on. And I think it was, Sue Smith was kind of talking about her experience playing football, and kind of quite often they'd have a match dedicated to kind of a campaign. So in this instance it was Kick It Out, and she was saying they'd just put on a t-shirt, they'd wear it to training, and then they'd play their game, and that game was dedicated to Kick It Out. But there was never really any more steps in terms of education about well what are the issues that we need to recognize, that we need to understand. And she was saying actually perhaps it would have been useful to have those discussions on the training field, not in the team talk before you're going out onto the pitch. But she was suddenly looking back and really reflecting on, there's all these things going on, there's loads of different campaigns, but what is the way to make it meaningful, and so that players just are, okay, this week it's football versus homophobia, for instance, or this week it's Stonewall regulations, or Kick It Out. Actually, what are the steps that need to be taken so that players fully understand what's going on as well? Is that a situation that you perhaps recognise or have any thoughts on?
Yeah, well, I just think I agree, with Sue, and I think that's the thing everybody is screaming for right now, is that they're just done with campaigns. They're done with the token gestures. They're done with, posting up a t-shirt or whatever on your social media. We're beyond that time, and people are ready. I think they're ready for the change. They're ready to have discussions and gain better knowledge and be better people ultimately. So I think education was obviously a key part of that. And I think when we talk about education, it's not to say the campaigns are wrong, but it should be accompanied with some form of education, or or conference or whatever, within the club's structures. And it's not always pertaining to players. I think there's a misconstrued structure that it's all about the players need discussion. Often, not always, but I think a large proportion of players have the better understanding of diversity because they're surrounded by diversity, especially in the modern game, on a day-to-day basis. If anything, they probably interact with more diverse people than most people in society on a regular basis. But it's important for players as well. But I think the wider structures within the club structures, backroom staff, coaches, operations, people within the club structure also need the education, as you would when you normally talk about things that go on with human resources to do with, gender discrimination. Also, I don't see any difference in that. It's a business. It runs the same way. Everyone should have the education, the formal education in that way. So, I just think everyone understands there is more that football and sport can do within its own kind of world to better educate within the game and try to lead by example. Because if we can lead by example with the audience we have, it will definitely have an impact, or hopefully a positive impact for the individuals that support the game you know, who go off into their own work, you know, and life, family spaces as well, to carry on those conversations and to educate their families or their children or their colleagues or within their industries. So yeah, I think that's something that needs to come into place. And I also think in terms of the governance perspective, the 3-step protocol against racist incidents on the pitch doesn't really cut it, in my opinion. It's nonsense, because you're literally placing the onus on the victim to take on the abuse more than one time. Saying, how many times can you take abuse before you've had enough? Like, you know, the minute that it should be flipped, and, you know, the person dishing that out is the one who should be punished straight away, directly. You know, if it takes the whole team walking off, and I've discussed this before, I think it's about empowering players to support their teammates. You know, if it takes all of you either holding the ball or walking off the pitch to get that across, to force the, you know, the powers that be to create these policy changes, then so be it. You know what I mean? Some of these issues are more important than the actual act of playing, and it will create, you know, much more advanced change that we want to see, hopefully, than not doing it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we've actually, like the last episode, I think we were talking about the like 3 strikes rule kind of thing.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's just a joke. It's just a joke. I didn't really have anything to say. We should just cut that out. But I was actually reading a really interesting Galbem article about it, which is why I was talking about it the last time, and just about how other incidents in football just don't, it's not, you know, 3 strikes or whatever it is. It's like immediately if this thing happens, then action is taken. Whereas with racism, it's like this big long delayed process. And actually, no, it needs to be clear. It needs to be, if something happens, then action is taken by referee or somebody higher up, and it shouldn't be on players to even have to do something. I appreciate that doing something is like, you know, walking off the pitch or doing whatever is really important for now, but it shouldn't have to be that way, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think, like you said, you know, for example, if a player wears a brand in a competition that goes against the competition rules for that governing body, then they get fined significant amounts of money because it's pertaining to money. But, you know, we're having to debate about racism or discrimination. Like, that's ridiculous. That should be embedded as, like, you know, obviously part of the human rights manifesto for everyone, including sport.
Exactly. And I mean, not to go down this rabbit hole, but, you know, the brand is related to the club's income financially. So, you know, that's why they're prioritizing it, because that's what they're focused on, their money coming in. And, you know, some issue going on with the players is the least of their priority, but it needs to be their priority, because, you know, racism is such a big issue. We'll have to edit that, because I lost my oomph at the end.
No, but I think that's the thing, isn't it? Because we're now talking about walking off the pitch as such a radical act. And so, you know, actually that's something that the whole team has to do. Actually, it really shouldn't be a radical act, because there's an incident of racism that's happened that players and, you know, everyone should not be tolerating. So actually walking off the pitch really should not be seen as a last resort, or, you know, all of these things. It should just be unacceptable that a racist incident has taken place. And actually, if clubs and the governing bodies need to put more money in for stewarding or for whatever needs to happen at grounds and stuff, then that money needs to be found and needs to be invested, because this is a serious issue, and it doesn't feel as though it's been taken as seriously as it really should be at the moment. So what does the future look like for you, Anita? Obviously you've signed for Aston Villa, which is super exciting. They've obviously got really big ambitions. Eni Aluko's their director of football there, so, you know, kind of looking forward to the next stage. I hate asking it, but, you know, have you thought about kind of other areas you want to go into in football, and, you know, kind of other things that you want to try out?
Yeah, no, for sure. I'm super excited to be joining Aston Villa, because I think it's a new journey that the club itself is embarking on as well, obviously being newly promoted. And I've never been in that position either, to be at a club that's been newly promoted, but to share on something that could you know, grow and develop into something really good is exciting, an exciting prospect, knowing that we have the backing and support of the club. And for me personally, I think I also want to utilize this time as a last sort of, you know, my last playing stint in football to also get into coaching and to, you know, I wasn't an area that I thought I would go into or want to do in it previously, but now I feel like it's important as well in the women's game to be there, to be visible, to try to make a difference. So I want to use this time to get my coaching badges and hopefully, you know, be able to contribute and give back to the game on the other side of the pitch, and as well as continue to do all the other things I've been doing in this meantime with my activism and, you know, work with FIFA Pro and Amnesty and all those other organizations. I think it's, you know, that's the beauty of football. I can still do so many things alongside it, and the broadcasting stuff, and keep, you know, talking and chatting about the thing I love the most, which is football and people in general. So yeah, you know, hopefully I'll be in some form in one of these capacities, either behind the game, trying to drive it from there, and kind of, you know, policy change and stuff like that, or otherwise, and or coaching. So hopefully that's where I'll be.
That sounds really exciting, and there's so many opportunities, aren't there? And you know, I think we've kind of been discussing throughout, there's so many more opportunities that football offer. In terms of your playing career though, are there any highlights that you look back on and, you know, kind of enjoy reminiscing about?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many actually. And that's not in a braggy way at all. I just
you got scrapped of everything.
But I just mean that obviously I've had a long career so far, which I'm really, you know, feel blessed to have had so far. And I can never forget my unbeaten Arsenal side, you know, the quadruple side, 2007. Had such great leaders in that team, the likes of Jane Ludlow, Kira Grant, who, you know, were great, and Emma Byrne and Alex Scott, all these players in that team, Leanne Sanderson. You know, we grew up together, a lot of us, and we shared a great experience, a history-making experience for the club and in the English game. Kelly Smith, of course. So, you know, winning that season, all 4 titles, was incredible. Haven't been able to replicate it since. So that's definitely one of the highlights, I think. I think the other highlight, well, 2 highlights I'd say, is winning the championship with my US team, Sky Blue, in the first season, because it was such a roller coaster season for us. It started off very badly, so which is a good story for everyone out there. You know, you can lose and tie several games on the trot at the start and still pull it back. But we had a lot of transition, you know, coaches getting fired, and we really had great leaders that stepped up, you know, Christy Rampone at the time became a player coach type thing, and Heather O'Reilly as well, were just unbelievable characters and the kind of characters we needed in the team in general. And then I would say the Olympics, you know, just to be at a homegrown tournament, you know, with all our home support, our family and friends, and just it's an experience I don't think I'll never get again, because to be around all these other athletes as well, it was incredible, from all over the world, and to share that space and see some of my own idols in a room is a madness. You never expect that to happen, you know, but when you see Usain Bolt and people walking in and you're like, oh my God, like I'm watching him. I'm the fangirl in that situation. So, that was incredible. And to kick off the tournament, you know, to literally kick it off as the first player to do that with Kelly was incredible. So yeah, I think those are probably the 3 highlights, but of course, you know, there's so many that I've had.
Yeah,
and those 3 are pretty amazing.
So
that was a good answer. So obviously we are here for football pride. So to finish up, can you tell us something or multiple things over the noise of my dog scratching on the door that you're proud of? Just to finish us up, could be anything.
Oh wow, football pride. Okay, what am I proud of? Well, I guess first and foremost, I'm proud to be a gay Black woman, and in a community of people that have responded really well to me sharing my experiences and my story, and have been extremely supportive. I'm proud to be in a sport that allows me to sort of be authentic and lend my voice to others as well, without really any restraint at the moment. Touch wood. And I'm just proud that there are people out there that, no matter what their struggles and challenges they're facing, they keep trying to persevere, and they keep trying to break these barriers that we've talked about, that that we need them as well. We need them to be pioneers for the betterment of society and football itself.
Thank you so much.
Amazing.
Fantastic.
We really enjoyed having a chat to you. There's some fantastic things that we spoke about, really interesting conversations, and hope everyone who is watching and then subsequently listening also enjoyed that too.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Anita.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's awesome.